things started on this bright and sunny March afternoon. Also, in celebration of Women's History Month, just a really good opportunity for Tempo and other organizations here in town to celebrate everything and all that women have been doing historically and now. And so we continue to feel and see the great strength of our network. In fact, I was just reminded on our Temple board meeting this afternoon that we have 70 emerging women leaders who were nominated this last time. So this is just a really good indication of the strength of that network. So collectively, if you look at Tempo and our emerging women leaders, we are about 800 members strong, which is just really incredible. So welcome to all of our Temple members, our emerging women leaders, and our many guests today. You are in for a really incredible program. New local leaders tackling new and old challenges with David Crowley and Lafayette Crump, moderated by our Temple member, Julie Granger. So we'll begin talking about that session in just a bit, but I know many of you are really asking, when do we get back in person? And so we wanted to at least get us back into the cadence of the third Thursday of every month for our Temple programming. So we started this last month. We will continue to have this offering just so it's back on your calendar. So when we are able to meet in person over the noon hour, we will do so. So they'll remain virtual for now. And when we are comfortable, when the city of Milwaukee and the CDC and all of those guidelines are open, we're looking probably the earliest in sometime in the fall. But that said, we do have a couple of social outings. If you've looked at your Monday message, you heard a little bit about the Light the Hone event on Friday, March 26th, which again, to commemorate the Women's History Month, as well as really focus on Tempo's evolution of our new brand. So the hone will be lit in our new brand colors. So please join us, watch for your Monday message for a couple of upcoming events as well. So for now, for the third Thursday of the month, we bring you today's program. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to Julie. Just a reminder, all attendees are muted, as well as the video has been disabled for attendees, but that does not mean we don't want to hear from you. And we really do encourage you to send us your questions using the chat or the Q&A function. We will have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of today's moderated discussion for that Q&A. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Julie Granger. She is the Executive Vice President at the MMAC. She is a longtime Temple member, joined our organization in 2010. She is on our Temple board and also is a very engaged and active member of our program committee. I'd love to turn it now over to Julie, who will moderate today's discussion. Julie.
Thank you so much, Jen. And good afternoon, Temple members and guests. We're very happy to have you with us today. And we are very excited to have our two guests with us today, too. We have two very involved, engaged, and impactful leaders. We have David Crowley, who is the Milwaukee County Executive, and Lafayette Crump, who is the Milwaukee Department of City Development Commissioner. County Executive Crowley took office last May, coming to county government after 2 terms in the state legislature, where he represented Assembly District 17. He was born and raised in Milwaukee, and he got into politics quite early in high school, I understand. And his career included serving as the African-American statewide organizer for Russ Feingold's Senate campaign. He is married with 3 daughters. Lafayette Crump, an attorney, is, as I mentioned, the Milwaukee Commissioner of City Development. He was also born and raised in Milwaukee. He served as Deputy Chief of Staff and Chief Diversity, Vendor, and Engagement Officer for the Milwaukee 2020 Host Committee of the Democratic National Convention. That's a mouthful, but remember the convention. He was also COO of Prism Technical Management and Marketing Services, which is a firm that manages projects to ensure supplier and workforce diversity. Lafayette serves on numerous boards and is also an adjunct professor at Marquette University Law School. So welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for joining us today. Let's start with just a little bit more background from each of you. And David, I'll start with you. What brought you back to Milwaukee politics and really led up to your run for the position of county executive?
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank Tempo for allowing myself and Lafayette to be here. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Julie, for moderating. But when you think about Milwaukee, local politics, it's always been near and dear to me. When I first ran for office in the spring of 2016, I actually ran for city council, and I lost that race and eventually became, state rep and now county exec. But when my predecessor, Chris Abele, decided that he wasn't running anymore in the fall of 2019, I thought about all the services that not only I was able to take advantage of, but my family were able to take advantage of throughout Milwaukee County government. And so when I think about my whole life, whether my parents were struggling with drug addiction or mental health, or when we were facing 3 different types of evictions, we relied so much on Milwaukee County's services and programs. And when you think about it, not a lot of people know what Milwaukee County does. And for me, it was about making sure that this county, who focuses on the spirit, the mind, and the body of people, when you think about the health and human services that we provide, I wanted to be able to tell my story, one, so folks know how we can be an asset to them. But it's also important that when I think about locally, all the issues that is facing Milwaukee County, when you think about the segregation, the housing, the unemployment, it's about moving the needle. And I wanted to be at the helm of what we can do here locally to bring more people to the table, whether you're Democrat or Republican, a business CEO or a union member. Local politics should be about us locally, and we shouldn't have to play the game of partisan politics there. And I wanted to bring that type of leadership here, and that's the reason why I ran.
Okay. Lafayette, you spent most of your career in the private sector. What do you think led you to take a job in the public sector? And even just to back up a little bit from that, as you mentioned, David, you said, not everybody fully understands what services the county provides. I think maybe even more so in your role, Lafayette, I think we could use a little primer on what does the development commissioner do?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question, Julie. Thank you, Tempo and Jen, for having me and the county executive here today. And man, I am just floored by how I am continually inspired when I hear the county executive's words. I was at an event this weekend where he was speaking and talking about a couple of community organizations that were combining with one another. And what he says about, first of all, having someone with his skill set who is now in a position and the background that he has had, who understands the issues that people have dealt with, that is exactly what you want to have in a role like this. Someone who combines that experience, life experience, the political experience, and this intelligence with the work that needs to be done is pretty phenomenal. We're lucky to have that here in Milwaukee. And I just want to say that here in this environment. It's an honor to be here with you, County Executive Crowley. And as it relates to me kind of moving into the public sector from the private sector, when I born and raised in Milwaukee, went away for college and law school, and ultimately what brought me back to Milwaukee was that I knew that wherever I was going to be located, I would be involved in the community in some way, that I would want to be helping to move that needle, as the county executive says. And I thought, why not do that in a place that I was from? There's a lot that I benefited from, people who helped me, and institutions who helped me, achieve where I was going career-wise. And I wanted to make sure that I was helping this community make those opportunities better for others. I've done that, in my career largely through board service, through volunteering, through where I direct my professional activity. I spent about 15 years working in a solo legal practice so I could work with small businesses and people who might not be able to afford the higher costs that I was charging when I was at big corporate law firms, and at the same time was doing diversity and inclusion and workforce and business development work, and really trying to find a way to help elevate people and get opportunities to people that they would otherwise not have. And I'm really fortunate to have now found myself in a position where I can lead more of that work, where I can be determining how do we as a city operate through more of an equity lens, and how do we make sure that we're not just benefiting one area of the city, we're not just benefiting people with certain experiences and backgrounds and skill sets and connections and relationships, but that everybody really has an opportunity for economic growth, for economic success, and for stability in their housing, which kind of dovetails into that question about what do we do at DCD, at the Department of City Development. And there are primarily two buckets. There is that economic development bucket, and then there is the housing side. On the economic development bucket, we are trying to attract businesses to the city. We want to make it a palatable environment for them to come, to locate here, to build, to grow the tax base, to bring jobs here, and more increasingly asking them to make sure that those jobs are available to everyone and that they're really expanding opportunity. And then in addition to that economic development side, but still connected, on the housing side, we want to make sure that people have stable housing. As the county executive mentioned, the county does a lot of great work in terms of helping people in that regard. But we also want to make sure that we're growing the housing stock in the city, that people have a chance to flourish in other areas of their lives because they know where they're going to live next month, or sometimes even next week or the following day. We also want to help do what we can to make housing more affordable from the standpoint of home ownership. We recognize where there's such a huge gap in Milwaukee, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, in terms of home ownership rates, especially for Black households and Latinx households compared to white households. And we want to close that gap. We want to create opportunities for everyone to participate in this wealth building process, but also stability. That, when you are spending all this time worrying about where you're going to live, how you're going to afford it, there's virtually no way that you're going to excel at other things and build the life you want for yourself, for your family, for your children. So we got to get a handle around that, and that's a really important task for us.
So you're both very obviously focused on improving Milwaukee and Milwaukee County as a place, and then the conditions for the residents that we have here. Can you maybe talk to a project or two that you have really collaborated on in your tenure thus far?
Well, I can talk about one that I know we will be collaborating on, and I've had the opportunity to work very closely with some of the county executive staff, which is the Couture Project, which is a city-county collaboration. Will be a streetcar stop, county land, city assistance to get that built on the infrastructure side, and I'm new in my tenure, even newer than county executive, but our offices, our department, the various departments that I am also working with at the city and the county are collaborating on moving that project forward. And to me, it has demonstrated in the short time that I've been here how important it is to have that collaborative nature between these separate units of government. We all want the same thing, and we bring different things to the table to help get it done. When I speak with Aaron Hertzberg and County Executive's Economic Development Office, it's just very clear the direction that he is getting about how important it is, not just to get this done, but to keep equity at the forefront, and that's coming, directly from the top at the county.
Absolutely. And I know everybody on this call probably cannot wait to see the Couture Project get started and get done. I know I cannot wait. But I think that's one project. When you think about the partnership between the city and the county, particularly around the response to COVID-19 pandemic, has been extremely phenomenal. When you think about the CARES dollars that we have received here in the county and the city, we've made sure I would say leverage, but I think when you say leverage in a partnership, it could be one-sided or seem one-sided. But we've been strengthening and leaning into the partnership to figure out how do we best manage the dollars that we're receiving while also making sure that we're providing that safety in a vaccine rollout that is equitable for everyone. And not only just with the city, but we've been doing that across all of Milwaukee County. for those who may not know, we don't have a health department. And so we created a unified emergency operations center, which has all 11 different health departments throughout Milwaukee County at the table. We have our healthcare systems as well, and really trying to strategize about how we focus on the safety and well-being of our residents. We're also thinking about how we slowly open up in a safe manner. And so the partnerships that have been created in the past year, particularly from Milwaukee County's perspective, has been extremely valuable. Because if we're going to get over this pandemic, whether you're talking about the safety issues or the recovery issues, we are all going to have to lean on one another. But even when we have to do that anyway. When we're talking about housing, when we're talking about education, when we're talking about the income gap, we have to lean on one another and tell the story about Milwaukee County and get more buy-in as to and I'm not going to say buy-in as far as why we've declared racism as a public health crisis, but more buy-in on how people can lean in and to pick up this mantle themselves and really lean into this work.
Yeah, I knew we'd end up, of course, talking about the pandemic today and what an extreme challenge it has been. I mean, both of you have huge jobs to begin with, and then, throw in international health crisis in there, and it's pretty overwhelming. So you talked a little bit about some of the partnerships that you're forging and have forged to deal with the realities of the pandemic. What lessons learned and maybe infrastructure that you are building will really help us in the future? So kind of what lessons are you taking with you that you've learned in this time of crisis?
I think right now, Milwaukee County, we're definitely learning a lot. And we know that we can be a think tank for and support many of our different municipalities as well as businesses. But I think that what we've learned really early on is that partnerships can get us through this, and not just with this pandemic, but through everything. And so we've been working with the business sector, we've been working with community leaders to get things done. But what I will say that, the toughest part about, governing in the middle of a pandemic is making sure that you have the resources needed to actually respond to this pandemic. And so I would say that we have learned how to tighten our purse strings a little bit, even though we continue to do that every day. But we have learned that we have so much more to offer. We can operate at a different capacity now moving forward. But I also think that one of the critical things that we've learned is that it's hard to coordinate a public health crisis when you don't have a countywide health department. And so, we're asking the question as to why. And I will say that we're not trying to create our own health department, but we want to figure out how can we create more efficient communication and messaging through all our healthcare, through our public health department, so we can directly target those individuals who have been disproportionately affected, pretty much. And that is, our Latinx and in our Black community and our communities of color throughout Milwaukee County. And so we have to continue to lean onto these partnerships after this pandemic. And, it's important that we don't just go by the wayside once this is over. It is important that we continue these partnerships, we continue this communication, because there's a lot that can come out of this. And I think that we can see some real success, not just in Milwaukee County, but in this region. And we're learning that we have the ability to lead not only in this region, but in the state and in this country. And I say this country because Milwaukee County was one of the very first municipalities in the country to track the COVID-19 data by race. And so we know that we can steer the national debate, and we want to continue to do that. And that's one of the very few things that we have learned. But there's a plethora of things that we're continuously learning about ourselves and our partnerships.
I think the point that the county executive made about taking these lessons and continuing to implement them, with respect to how we can help from an economic standpoint, but also thinking about, the racial equity environment that, so many companies and individuals and organizations have realized that this is something that has been a problem for centuries, and we need to address it, and we need to address it head on. That, my concern early on when things started, when people were kind of scrambling, after the murder of George Floyd, of, well, what can we do? What can we throw up on social media? What can we do this week? What can we do to assure our employees that we care about this, or customers? how do we make sure that this is a true movement and not just a moment? And I've been heartened to see the real steps that a number of entities have taken to really rethink the way that they go about things. And I think we have to do that not just with respect to racial equity, but with respect to economic equity and opportunity as well. And figuring out, where were the gaps and how do we perpetuate those gaps through the choices that we make? Through some of the CARES Act funding, for example, we ended up doing 3 rounds of funding to local businesses, and we were happy to collaborate, with the county on how they were doing that as well. But strictly through city dollars, I think we did about $20 million to local businesses, over 1,000 businesses that were provided assistance, and in many cases, we learned that the dollars that they got prevented them from laying off employees, from letting employees go for good. In some cases, it actually resulted in the hiring of employees in the middle of this pandemic. And so what we were reminded of there is the tenuous nature of business that, I think we often look at businesses and sometimes think, well, they're just fine. They've got customers, coming and going, and they're an established name. They're this, that, and the other thing. And that if that flow doesn't keep happening, you obviously impact not just the business, but all of their employees, and then all of the businesses and families and other entities that those employees are supporting. And it's a very tenuous situation that a lot of our businesses are in. And without support, without the right level of help at the right time, that many can fall off a cliff. We talk about the benefits cliff for individuals, and there is kind of that cliff for businesses as well, that break even cliff, where at some point, if they're not even viable, what happens to the entire ecosystem?
So sticking with kind of employment and business for a minute, Lafayette, I know we've talked a little bit about the importance of the health of Milwaukee City and County residents, the importance of sustainable housing. When you look at employment and you look at our economy locally recovering from the pandemic, there's been a lot of talk that it's not going to be an equitable recovery. And so as we look at not only making sure that there are employment opportunities for everyone, how do we look at what types of those employment opportunities are? And maybe this gets a little bit more into the economic development side of things in terms of what are the businesses as we look forward that are going to create those high value sustaining jobs that we need so badly here in the region?
Well, that is an appropriate assumption and a very complicated question. I think, will the economic recovery be equitable? The answer, unfortunately, is no, because we don't live in an equitable country. And what we need to keep striving to do is make it as equitable as possible and recognize that however far we get, we're going to have further to go. And we're going to have to recognize that there is always something more that we could be doing. And, we've talked a lot, here, and I think we do in general in this country. We talk about what are the gaps with respect to African American and Latinx home ownership in terms of employment. But what we lose sight of is where equity lies in a number of other areas. You have to look no further than what recently happened down in Atlanta. That we have to recognize that equity and inequity have many faces, in this country, and so we have to be cognizant of that. Where are we forgetting to look? What are we forgetting to do as it relates to how we determine the types of businesses and the types of jobs that will get this done? I think one of the crucial things that I want to do in my tenure in this role is recognize the interconnectedness and the intersection of how many different things play into economic equity and economic success as a city and as a region. when I look at the idea of let's make Milwaukee a tech hub, let's bring all these tech jobs here, there are other people who are yelling in my other ear, where are those jobs actually going? Is that going to be equitable? Just because that brings jobs, who's going to get those jobs? So then that leads me to think, okay, well, what are our companies, what are our universities doing to make sure that they're equitable from that standpoint, that they are churning out people that look like everyone in the community? And then the question becomes, okay, what's happening before that? What's happening in high school and middle school and lower? What is happening to get us to a point where you don't find companies saying, well, we looked and we couldn't find anyone. We really tried, but nobody black applied for this, or we had 2 Latinos apply, but they don't have the skill set. We have to get beyond just looking at what is here and now. We got to work in 2 ways. We got to do what we can to increase equity in the moment, and we also have to keep seeding the environment so that 5, 10, 15 years from now, we're not still having the exact same argument in the exact same way.
I don't even know how to even add on to that one. I think you really summed that up perfectly. But I would say, as a role in government, it's also our job in making sure that we're working with those businesses and training those individuals to be prepared for those jobs tomorrow. And so so when you think about the value in partnerships, we have been stepping outside of our comfort zone. For example, we know that we're going to be bringing on electric buses right here in Milwaukee County. And one of the very first questions I had was, well, where do I find a technician in Wisconsin to work on electric buses? And our MATC, MATC or Milwaukee campus doesn't have that type of program. And so, we reached out to Dr. Martin right away to say, is this something that you can start thinking about in the future? Because we know this is coming down the pipeline. And so it is our responsibility as decision makers in government to be paying attention to the changing winds and investing in the training and in our human capital right here in our own backyard to make sure they're available and ready for work.
So David, when you look at kind of the breadth of agenda items that you've got on your plate, tell us a little bit about what some of the policy solutions are that you are considering, and maybe specifically talking a little bit about the proposed sales tax increase and the role that you think that plays in your agenda.
Well, I would not be doing my job if I did not talk about the sales tax increase. And so that is really one of the biggest things that we could do for Milwaukee County at this moment. So just to give folks a quick history, for the past 10 years, we've cut $30 million every year from Milwaukee County budget while still trying to provide those critical person-centered services. And when you think about the future, we're going to have to cut an extra $20 million year after year for the next 16 years. But you want to think about the immediate. If we don't find extra revenues for Milwaukee County in the next 6 years, we will only have enough dollars, enough money to actually pay for state mandated services. So when you think about all the parks that we get to enjoy, it's going to be hard to fund them. Our senior programs, senior meals, public safety, our Milwaukee County transit system, those are some of our biggest used amenities that we have, yet they are not mandated by the state. And so we have been painting the picture of Milwaukee County being that building, being that house on the block who have had many cracks in our foundation. And when COVID-19 came, it set ablaze the rest of the facility. But the CARES dollars that we've received last year and this year is helping us put out that fire, helping us put a little bit of drywall, get some electricity in there. But it's not going to fix our foundation, our long-term fiscal issues. And so as when you think about our tax levy, the $300 million that we receive here locally, 80 million of that directly goes into our pension costs. So we have to find ways to fix some of the issues that were created years ago, way before I even thought about getting involved in politics. We have to fix many of those issues because it's really coming down on some of our most vulnerable communities because we cannot make the proper investments, and not just with those current initiatives and programs. The newest thing that we decided to do was focus on racism as a public health crisis. And when you focus on racial equity, you also have to invest in racial equity. And so we have changed a lot of things that we do. We have a racial equity budgeting tool. So when we're going to make any investments or cuts, that we're paying attention to who's going to be disproportionately impacted, because it's important that when you think about county government, we have to be there, particularly for our most vulnerable communities when they're at their worst. And so we want to make sure that we can provide that, but it's going to take resources to do that. And so we are pushing for the sales tax. I'm glad I had a few laps around the track in Madison, because some of the relationships that I have and the conversations that we've been having have been productive. And I will say that if we don't get it, it's going to cause a lot of pain for not only us, but all Wisconsin taxpayers across the state. And so those are some of the things that we're focusing on right now. But we also know that, we have an infrastructure problem. And when you look at many of our county assets, we haven't been able to make the proper investments. So we're working right now with the federal government with a possible infrastructure plan about how we can improve our infrastructure and make those proper investments.
Lafayette, anything to add on the sales tax or other budget priorities?
I would just say we are quite supportive of the ability for municipalities to set their sales tax rates, and it feels somewhat draconian for the state to determine that cannot be done. That's about all I'll say about that.
And it does come with property tax relief. Let me say that.
Great point.
No, I think no one would argue that we do, both in the city and county, have some cracks in our foundation, as you've both talked about. But I think we also have a number of things on the asset side of the ledger, and that's certainly part of your role, Lafayette, is to market and sell the city for investment. So we were poised to really have a unique time in the spotlight nationally and internationally with the DNC convention and some other things that were happening or scheduled to happen, I should say, last summer. So how do we regain some of that momentum? Because we truly do have some great things to talk about and sell here.
Well, I think we do. I think we have a lot of great things to sell here, not least of which is leadership who wants to do interesting things, wants to try things that may not have been tried previously. And I think you have that certainly at the county level, and you have that in multiple roles, at the city and at the state. So I think all of that gives Milwaukee a real opportunity to really regain its footing. I don't know the exact timetable. I'd be lying if I said that I know that. But what I do know is that we're going to recapture that momentum. In part because this was a not just a national but a worldwide phenomenon. The things that existed here previously, the energy that existed, the excitement and the pent up demand to do certain things here will return. Fiserv and the area outside of Fiserv, that will be hopping again. The energy will be back at let me get this right, American Family Field, downtown. There's vibrancy growing in different neighborhoods. We're working to ensure, that things will happen. But I think it's not just that this excitement continues or comes back, but it's also that when excitement and vibrancy occur in different parts of the city, that more people know about them and believe in them and believe in what is possible there. When it comes to the DNC, and knowing that obviously that did not turn out how any of us wanted it to turn out here. But the thing that we will never lose is that Milwaukee sought that opportunity and we won it. It was coming here, and we showed the country, the world, but I think more importantly, we showed ourselves what we are capable of. We don't have to consider ourselves, a lower tier city that cannot attract things of that nature. That's really the biggest part for me, that hope and belief in what this city can be, and that's never going away. I say, I've said before that I think the most kind of significant part of the Obama presidency was, as cliche as it is, the hope, that audacity of hope that it tells people, no matter what their background, but certainly it tells young Black boys that you can be anything in this country. You're going to run into a whole lot of obstacles, and not all of those obstacles are going to go away as hard as we try to work over these next few months, weeks, years. But anything truly is possible here. And I believe that, on a level here in Milwaukee, that's what we have to believe, that anything is possible. We can have the kind of city we want. We can get to where we want from an equity standpoint. We can include more people. We can have our neighborhoods be as vibrant as our downtown, if not more vibrant. We can have neighborhoods where people say, that's where I want to be. That's where I want to live. That's where I want to go hang out on the weekend. And that's what we're striving for. That is a huge part of our drive at DCD, that we have a city where throughout the city, north, south, west, that it's not just downtown or bust, that people are happy and excited about where they live and where they can work and play.
That led me to the very next question I had, Lafayette. I'm glad you brought up neighborhoods, because I think there had been a lot of time and attention spent on the downtown area, and really bolstering that to the point where we were experiencing a true renaissance downtown specifically. But we all have talked about where is the residual effects on the neighborhoods. Are there any potential projects or things that you're working on right now that you can share with us, specific details on any neighborhood projects?
Well, one thing that I can certainly share is our attention to those matters. And I can assure you, Julie, and really everyone who's watching, that there is an incredible amount of attention to not just specific projects that exist right now that are coming along, like the community within the corridor, and our continued efforts to ensure that something exciting and job creating happens at Century City. I am out there as saying something big is going to happen there before the end of the year, and I truly believe that, because there's so many things germinating. Something big is going to happen at Century City this year. And eventually, we're going to have Northridge, and we're going to be able to do something really interesting there. That continues to work its way through the court system, but we're going to be able to do something there. What we're spending time on is, so when we say, there's a lot of time and attention on downtown, part of that is because there are so many people clamoring with an idea that is already fully baked, and they come to us with an idea, and then we spend our time trying to figure out how to make that as successful and appropriate as possible, and how to bring more people in to that project on the workforce side, on the business side, et cetera. But we are studying all of the industrial districts in the city. We are going to be, we're implementing a study for the Bayview and Southeast area. Going to be doing studies in other parts of the city to see, okay, what will truly work here, from not just is it economically viable to put it here, but also how does that catalyze other things in this neighborhood, in the heart of or in the surrounding area of where we're trying to put it. And I'm excited about a lot of the conversations I'm having, not just with the 15 alders and all of them and what they want to do in their part of the city, but also the developers that are coming to me with interesting ideas about what they can make happen there, from intriguing housing possibilities to projects that are really going to bring jobs and some interesting entertainment options. So our attention is there. And I think you're going to see some really great projects come to fruition.
Right. We shall stay tuned. So as you both look out a few years into the future, at whatever comes next, what would you like your legacy to be in the roles that you currently have? David, we'll start with you.
Right now I'm only thinking about getting over this pandemic. And honestly, I want to have the legacy of getting elected, not just as the first African-American and the youngest person being in this seat, but getting us over this pandemic. And I have a big stake in the ground that some people think is a tall order, but I want to make sure that everybody knows of really getting us off the list of being one of the most segregated places in the country. And it's really about, again, moving the needle every day, daily, working with our partners internally and externally to make that happen and having them adopt the same idea. I mean, to see what MMAC and many of our businesses in downtown Milwaukee have been doing to increase the amount of people of color in decision-making positions. It started really with Milwaukee County saying that racism is a public health crisis, and let's take a look at this. And so, my legacy is really about, continuing this, and it's going to continue this journey on racial equity, but just making sure that no matter who you are and what you look like right here in our county, that you have access to opportunity, access to prosperity, and you feel valued and respected, knowing that you can be a part of the table.
I'm sorry, same question for me. I apologize. Yeah, I was absorbing that. Yeah, I think I don't spend a lot of time at the moment thinking legacy, but I certainly hope that when I'm done, I've made my community better. That I've given my all, and while it's not necessarily a part of this role, that I helped prepare my daughters to live very fulfilled lives and to give back to the community as well. And I have no doubt that the county executive feels that way about his children as well. Yeah, just am I making this a better place? Am I creating opportunities for others?
Great. Okay, a couple last minute, hopefully a little bit lighter questions for each of you. So I think I have this right. Both of you have 3 daughters, is that right? Okay. David, I was reading an article that said one of your hobbies is actually doing arts and crafts with your family. So I'm wondering, are you guys like into knitting? Is it more of the pottery painting? What are some arts and crafts that you guys do?
A lot of painting. We like to buy a lot of canvas boards. My 3-year-old loves to paint. I mean, she's literally painting almost every day now. So she loves to go out there and paint. But the other thing is that they love Roblox and all these other video games. And so we like to spend a lot of time, playing with dolls. We do a lot of role playing with dolls, imaginary playing. But the arts and crafts is really, it's for me, it's beneficial because not only do I have a chance and opportunity to really sit down with my daughter and have fun with her, but this is also a learning and a creative moment for her and throughout her developmental stage. And so this has been a great opportunity for me to spend with them, and not just coming home. And when they come home, they see daddy, that means it's time to go to bed. So they only see me for bed. So this is a great opportunity for me.
So Lafayette, as kind of one of the region's chief cheerleaders, if you bring people into town, tourists perhaps that have never been here before, obviously pre or post pandemic, how do you like to show the city off?
Well, I like to show, of course, the lakefront. I mean, you can't bring someone here. It depends on maybe the time of year. You can take them to a festival, but you got to show them that lake, which a lot of people are just kind of floored by. That wow, this is here, and there's beach, and there's all this water view. I'm like, yeah, this is here all the time. I spent a fair amount of time at the St. Kate when I was over working at the host committee, because we were actually in the office tower connected to it. And what was exciting to see about that St. Kate lobby is that they really found a way, and maybe some of it was the newness, and maybe it was the a little bit more activity downtown. But it, along with that area outside of Fiserv Forum in the Deer District, when you see that level of diversity and people having fun and enjoying themselves amongst one another, really gives you kind of a picture of what other parts of our lives could be like, and that segregation that we do have, that the county executive speaks about, that we all recognize that we got to do something about that as not just a city but as a region. you see how that changes in certain environments. And it really makes you want to do more about that, on a more global scale in the city and in the county and region. So I think environments like that, where you see a lot of people having fun, it's good energy, and there's a diversity there that feels effortless because it is. That's what I like people to see.
Can't wait to get back in there. Yes, agreed. So at this point, I'm going to bring Bridget in, and I think we have a couple of questions from our audience today, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to put those questions before you.
Thanks, Julie. And just want to say my sincere appreciation to you both, David and Lafayette, for being with us. I've just been awed by what you've shared today, and I know that you could choose to live anywhere in the country. And thank you so much for choosing Milwaukee to be your home and your place where you're impacting. And we're glad that you're here with us today. So there's a couple questions, actually a lot of questions, but as we talked about in prep, there's questions around how do we get engaged? Like, you've got women on the call that are just like, tell us what to do. Like, but before we get there, so you can think about that because that is coming. But before we get there, so there's a question around Wisconsin Policy Forum found there's 85% pay gap in Milwaukee County. Could you speak a little bit about what role do each of you and your departments play in closing the pay gap?
And I'm sorry, the 85% pay gap, is that men and women? Is that, or a difference between the two counties? Okay, I'm sorry, can you clarify?
It's probably around the men and women. Is that it, Julie?
I'm not familiar with that particular statistic. I'm certainly aware that there is a male-female pay gap that exists, as well as a racial pay gap.
Yeah, well, I'll speak, I guess, briefly to both. I think one thing that's important is that people be willing to talk to and advocate for others who don't look like them. I, had this opportunity both as, in my role at the host committee to really, to talk to some of the other people on my team, with quite a few women on that team. I think we were majority women, and talk about what some of the different, salaries were and how to advocate for those things, and being supportive of people who were doing similar work to make sure that everyone was paid, commensurate with one another. In my role at DCD, being a relatively new commissioner coming on board, being able to have conversations directly with others who were considering roles with the city about, what was my salary negotiation like? I mean, these are all end up being public salaries, but there is, some negotiation involved in all of these. And so I think men, not to mention other women, but I think it's really important that men are willing to speak honestly, with women about what they're getting paid and what the work is, and suggesting that they advocate harder for themselves, and then being there to support that, and being there when you're in the group of people who make those decisions, that you think about the bias that exists where a man who is hard charging and ambitious and advocating for themselves, well, that's a leader, that's smart, that is, we know he's going to bring that to the job as well. And you can basically flip that on its head for the way that women are often perceived. And so you have to be the voice in that room explaining that, wait a minute, what would you say if this was a guy doing this? What are we doing here? So it's living that out, living that truth, and demanding the same of others.
I think that's an excellent question, and something that I identified early on in my tenure being county executive. So a year or two ago, our comptroller actually did a report called Pulling Back the Curtain, and was tracking men and women in all the races and how much they were getting paid. And mostly white men have been in the best and highest income positions here at Milwaukee County. Right now, we have 2 department heads, both women, who make $30,000 less than somebody that they're supervising. That is ridiculous. There's no reason why that is on the books. But I do know that a lot of this was just dealing with fights between the former executive and the former board. But we've been working with the board right now to have conversations about bridging the pay equity gap, whether we're talking about race or whether we're talking about gender, because it is prevalent in our data that we have to get better. And so we're having this conversation. We recently did something for example, many of our trades who were at like 75, we're getting paid 75% the market rate that they were in the field they were in. And so we found a way to help give them a bump up. And it's to get them closer to the market rate. We couldn't get quite there, but we're doing what we can. And there's so much more that we have to do, particularly in government settings, to set the tone for our partners.
Thank you both for that really thoughtful response and answer. I'm sitting here and just took a deep breath. So thank you so much for that. So as you're looking out and you're thinking about, you've got about 50 women on the call that are like, yes, let me in, let me help. I think about all of us on the call have, purchasing power, right? And we talked about money a little bit, investments and all these things. And as you see in the organizations that you're connecting with, who should we be looking at? Who's doing a great job? Who should we be leaning into? Give us some advice and guidance and where you think we should be looking.
Well, I think being supportive of both growing businesses, businesses, small businesses that are owned by people of color and owned by women. We know that when you support businesses owned by people of color, when you support businesses owned by women, you often have a greater chance of also helping other people of color and women get hired and get opportunities. And so being very thoughtful of where you spend those funds. And I would say also, coming from the previous work that I had in terms of helping small businesses and disadvantaged businesses get opportunities, is that there are often more challenges for those businesses because they don't necessarily have the same access to capital, the same history and the same experiences with partners. And you got to give those businesses a chance to get their feet under them and get better. You got to give them a chance to make a mistake. And so I say, first of all, don't write off a business that doesn't quite live up to what your expectations are. And certainly don't write off an entire category of businesses if you have one bad experience with one business. Don't engage in that kind of prejudice with your spending dollars, where you just assume that, okay, this didn't work out. I'm not buying from another black business because this black business took 3 days to get me my product when I thought it would be here in one. I had to check myself a little bit, looking at all the books that I order from Amazon, right? And unless you have some sort of super strength or super quality, you really can only read one book at a time. So I'm loving the 1 day shipping, right? Or 2 days, and yet the book stack is getting higher and higher. And I said to myself, it would probably be just as easy to order this from this African-American woman bookstore. And when the book gets here in 3 days and I wait a month to read it, it really didn't impact me. And so going out of your way to figure out how you can be supportive of more diverse businesses and taking that time to do that, I think is a huge step you can take.
I definitely would agree. I mean, we want to get connected to our minority chambers. You have the Ethnic Business Council. How can you support many of these businesses? And really just introduce yourself, because I mean, there are opportunities where we can contract with many of these folks or hire them on. But when you say, organizations to support, I believe in the 3 T's. If you can't give your treasure, you have your time or your talent that you can give. And I always say, support as many entrepreneurial organizations as you can, but, also invest in our young people. When I think about myself and where I come from, it was the organization called Urban Underground that literally saved my life at the age of 17, introduced me to community organizing and to politics. And now I'm in a position to give back to this community because they've poured so much into me. And so there's a plethora of organizations out here. And you can always go to United Way and you can find out many of the organizations that they're working with is doing some magnificent work on the ground. But I will also say, again, stress this, connect with many of the chambers, connect with many of these ethnic chambers, because you may be the gatekeeper in helping build the capacity with many of these businesses, and not just here in Milwaukee, but all across Southeastern Wisconsin.
And I'll just add to that, do that and demand that others do the same. When there's spending happening within your organization, when there's hiring happening within your organization, just ask the question that may not even be on the table. You know, what does our list look like here? Have we considered this group? Have we considered outreach here? I notice this is a group of all white people. I notice this is all, Fortune 500 companies. Maybe there's a local company or a local business that is going to hire some people that can do this work. Ask the question. There is rarely, if ever, any penalty for that.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. And in the interest of time, we've got probably one more question. What would you like to close out in sort of advice on how we can help you, this women organization, and across the county?
So I'll just, adding to that, being vocal, being advocates, be vocal about what's important to you. Do not be shy about expressing what you think is equitable, and getting to the right people. And want to be clear, we're talking about equity in its many different phases and shades here. Gender, race, LGBTQIA issues. Share your unique point of view. All these different perspectives are necessary for us to be at our best. I would also say, encourage government service and encourage proper compensation for government service. We need people, we need talented, smart people to come into the government and do work, and not just feel that they have to stay in the private sector. And then, finally, just support one another and demand that men do the same. Don't give us a pass. Tell us when we're out of pocket.
Absolutely. And I would say that, when we're talking about equity, whether we talk about gender equity or racial equity, it's not easy work. And so we need everybody. One, if you're going to be in this field, make sure you take care of yourself, because you can definitely get burned out doing this work. But it's extremely important that we don't give up. And I'm going to say a quote from a great philosopher who is Yoda, which is do or do not. There is no try. We have to continue to knock on the door, and at some point probably break the door down for folks to hear what we're saying. But eventually people will understand it, and recognizing where people are on that spectrum of being awake and respecting that, and slowly bringing people along, but also recognizing that not everybody's going to be with you. But we need you in this work. We need you in for the long haul. So make sure to take care of yourself and never give up, because if you don't see this, our children, my 3 daughters, will be able to see the fruits of our labor.
Thank you both very much. Jen, over to you.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Julie, for moderating today's discussion. And thank you, David and Lafayette. Just really rich content and conversation today. So much that gathered great content and thoughts from you, specifically and particularly your comments about pay equity continues to be a focus and a priority of our Women's Leadership Collaborative, which is the alliance with Professional Dimensions and Milwaukee Women, Inc. So thank you for your comments on that. So our programming continues, Tempo Milwaukee and our Emerging Women Leaders in April. It's a big month for us. We've got our annual program meeting on April 15th. We take a look back. It was at this time last year that we went virtual for the first time. And so we'll gather 4 Tempo Milwaukee members that led that discussion in early on, and reflect with them on what that year has brought them, and taking a look back, as well as some business. We'll elect a new board slate for both Tempo Milwaukee board as well as our Tempo Foundation. And then you do not want to miss our 31st annual Mentor Awards on April 29th. We are celebrating and recognizing 4 heroic mentors: Erica Joy Daniels, Ellen Gilligan from the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, Peggy Williams Smith from Visit Milwaukee, and the Medical College of Wisconsin, again, for being and stepping up and rising above all that the pandemic threw at them. So really a wonderful celebration. Thank you all for being with us today. Enjoy your Thursday. Thank you again to Lafayette and David. We will see you next month.